And the institution had spent centuries designing itself so you would get caught on both. Good news. The law barely knew you existed. Now, for the genuinely strange part, and this is where being a woman who loved women actually came with a bizarre, grim little advantage. The medieval and early modern legal system mostly could not figure out what you were even doing. The whole framework for understanding sex back then was built around one act: penetration, done by one person to another. That was the definition. And in the minds of theologians, two women together did not obviously fit that definition, because there was, in their very technical phrasing, no phallus involved. So a lot of authorities concluded that whatever women did together, it could not be the real, serious version of the sin. You can see this in the penance books, which itemized and priced out every category of sin in cold, bureaucratic detail, the medieval equivalent of a corporate expense policy for the human soul. Theodore's penitential gave a woman who slept with another woman 3 years of penance. A man who slept with a man got 10. Bede's version, 3 years for 2 women, but 7 years if a nun used an instrument with another nun. Pope Gregory III, in the 8th century, set female unnatural acts at 160 days of penance, against roughly a year for male sodomy. Across the board, what you might do was treated as the lesser offense. One 12th century cleric, named Etienne de Fougères, summed up the official attitude with breathtaking dismissiveness. He called sex between women more ridiculous than sinful, again because of the missing phallus. Read that back. The medieval church looked at lesbian desire, and its main reaction was not horror. It was a shrug and a chuckle. You were not a monster to them. You were a punchline. Think about what that actually meant for daily life inside your convent. The men who held power over you, the bishops, the confessors, the inquisitors, were not lying awake, worried about what the nuns were doing with each other. Their entire mental model of sin pointed somewhere else. They policed your friendships obsessively, yes, but mostly out of a fear that you would form factions and break the community's discipline, not because they pictured what you might do after lights out. The thing you might actually be doing was, to them, almost invisible. You could hide in plain sight inside the very blind spot of the institution that owned you. The numbers back this up in the bleakest way possible. Historians digging through the entire medieval record, centuries of European history, have found only around 12 documented cases of sexual relationships between women. 12. Meanwhile, there were thousands of accusations against men. That is not because women were not doing anything. It is because the authorities mostly were not looking, were not naming it, and did not have the vocabulary to prosecute it even when they tripped over it. Bad news. There was always a catch. Before you get too comfortable, do not mistake barely understood for safe. The leniency had a switch, and the switch was the instrument. Remember how the whole legal definition revolved around penetration and a phallus? The flip side was that if a woman was found to have used a dildo, an object that simulated the missing piece of their definition, the shrug vanished instantly. Suddenly you were not a punchline. You were imitating a man, usurping the male role, and that was treated as deadly serious. This is the hinge that every execution turned on. In 1477, in the German city of Speyer, a woman named Katharina Hetzeldorfer was put to death by drowning. Her crime involved using an instrument and taking on what the court saw as a masculine role. The unsettling part is that the authorities barely had the legal language to charge her with anything, because the offense had no settled name. They executed her for a crime they could hardly describe. Then there is Katharina Link, and I have to be upfront, she was not a nun, so she is context here rather than a sister of yours. But her case shows you exactly where the line was. In 1721, in Prussia, Link had lived as a man under the name Anastasius, married a woman, and used a stuffed leather device. When it came out, the officials were genuinely tangled up about how to punish her. They wrote, with what reads like real frustration, that the Bible was silent on sex between women, and that her act did not even technically count as sodomy because it was done, in their words, with a lifeless leather device. So they argued about it. And then King Frederick William I settled the argument by having her beheaded. She is often cited as the last person executed in Europe for lesbian sexual activity. So no, you were not actually safe. You were ignored right up until you were not, and the consequences could be lethal. And do not buy the comforting myth that women always got off easy. Thomas Aquinas, the heavyweight theologian of them all, lumped female same-sex acts into the same sinful category as male sodomy, and in parts of France, Spain, Italy, and the German lands it was capital in principle. Enforcement was rare, not impossible. The historian Helmut Puff has spent a career arguing that this whole picture of breezy lesbian impunity is overstated. The church was not tolerant, it was distracted. There is a difference, and the difference could cost you your head. Now meet the nun who broke every record. Which brings us to the woman whose story is the reason this whole topic survives at all. Her name was Benedetta Carlini, and she is, as far as the surviving paperwork goes, one of the earliest documented cases of a same-sex relationship in modern Western history. Not because she was the first, because she got caught, investigated, and written down. Benedetta was born in 1590 in a tiny mountain village called Villano, northwest of Florence. At the age of 9, in 1599, her family placed her with a small community of devout women in the town of Pescia. This group was nicknamed the Theatines, and it eventually got official papal recognition in 1620 as a proper convent, with Benedetta rising to become its abbess. So far, model resume. Then Benedetta started seeing things. Her visions began around 1614. By 1618, she claimed she had received the stigmata, the wounds of Christ, appearing on her hands, her feet, her head, and her side. In May of 1619, she announced that Jesus himself had ordered her to undergo a mystical marriage, a spiritual wedding to Christ, and she staged the ceremony in front of the whole community. This was not a quiet private vision. She turned it into theater. She spoke in voices, she described heaven in vivid detail. She claimed Christ had swapped her heart for his own. For a small-town convent in the Tuscan hills, this was the most extraordinary thing anyone had ever witnessed. The other nuns were stunned. Some were convinced they were living under the same roof as a genuine living saint, and word started to spread beyond the walls. Remember, this is a culture where a verified holy woman was a huge deal. A convent with a real mystic became a destination, a source of prestige, donations, and pilgrims. So Benedetta's claims were not just personal, they were potentially very good business, which meant a lot of powerful people had reasons to want them to be true. The church sent an investigator, and the first investigation, around 1619 and 1620, actually went well for her. The provost in charge concluded her visions were the real deal, she was reinstated, and the convent was granted full enclosure. Benedetta had, against all odds, passed the audit. Saint status looked locked in. The angel did it. That was the defense. Here is where it falls apart, and where you, our hypothetical sister, should pay close attention to how thin the line was between mystic and prisoner. A second investigation opened around 1622, this time under a far more skeptical church official. And this one went digging into Benedetta's private life. The key witness was a younger nun named Bartolomea Crivelli, who had been assigned to share Benedetta's cell, partly to care for her during her violent visions. What Bartolomea described turned the whole case inside out. She testified that during certain episodes, Benedetta would say she was no longer herself. She claimed to be possessed by, or transformed into, a male angel named Splenditello. And while she was Splenditello, by Bartolomea's account, she would draw Bartolomea onto the bed and initiate sexual acts